In the West, when something is seriously wrong at the national level, an economic slide, a botched crisis response, a policy failure, a public health mess, people don't just rage at the nearest official. They trace the problem upstream because the government is treated like one machine, and the person at the top is the one who sets the direction, hires the managers, owns the decisions, and ultimately signs off on how that machine behaves. In Russia, the reflex is often the opposite. A hospital collapses, a town freezes, a regional budget gets eaten alive, corruption is everywhere, and you'll still hear the president is fine, it's the government that's rotten. The Tsar is good, the Boyars are bad. So here's the question, why do Russians blame mayors and governors for everything that goes wrong, but keep the supreme leader clean? I'm Elvira Bary, a writer born in the Soviet Union, and tonight I'll show you the mental model that makes this never his fault logic feel natural, even comforting. Here's our roadmap. The Good Tsar myth. How Russians came to believe in the Good Tsar. The vertical of power. Why Russians view power as top-down. If only he knew. Why Russians ask the president to fix a broken pipe in Siberia. The scapegoats. How the system burns low-level officials to keep the leader clean. The fear of chaos. Why a bad Tsar is still preferred over no Tsar. Grooming the Alpha. What Putin's inner circle has in common with a group of apes. If independent analysis matters to you, subscribe, like, share, or join my think tank, or support via PayPal or Super Thanks, so conversations like this can exist without permission. You can also give this video free hype points so more people will see it. The Good Tsar myth. This is the oldest trick in Russian politics. You put the ruler high above the mass, almost out of reach. He is not a manager or a civil servant, he is more like an icon. And then you put the real pain down here on the ground, in the hands of people everyone can see. The local official, the clerk, the police chief, the petty tyrant at the passport office, the man who can ruin your life over one stamp. For centuries, ordinary Russians have been helpless before feudal lords and government officials. They had no means to fight back. They could only hope that someone more powerful would step in and protect them. State propaganda led them to believe that such a powerful protector existed at the very top. They almost never got to see the Tsar in person. He lived far away. That distance made it easier to imagine him as pure and benevolent. There's a classic scene from the 16th century that shows how this works. Ivan the Terrible staged a public drama. He walked away from Moscow, blamed the elite, and signaled to ordinary people that he was on their side. It's a simple split, and it still sounds familiar. The ruler is not your enemy. The people around him are. That split is political gold because it turns rage into loyalty. It ended exactly the way it was designed to end. Terrified of losing the Tsar, the people and the church begged him to return. They promised him extraordinary powers to punish the treacherous Boyars. You can see the same psychology much later, when faith had already switched costumes. The Soviet Union killed the old monarchy, but it quietly kept the old emotional script. During Stalin's purges, people wrote letters upward, not to a court or an independent prosecutor. These were non-existent in the Soviet system. They wrote to Stalin himself. The logic was the same. If only the leader knew what's going on here, he would fix it. Someone must be hiding the truth from him. Even prisoners said it out loud. If only Stalin knew. It's not rational, but it's a coping mechanism. If you admit the leader is the source of the terror around you, you are staring into a black hole. If you blame bad people below, you can still hope. And hope is not a small thing in an abusive system. Hope is a survival tool. This is why the myth survives even when people are educated, urban, and online. The myth is not about facts. It's about emotional cost. It's cheaper to believe in a good Tsar than to accept that the whole structure is built to produce the mess you are living in. It's also safer. In Russia, blaming the bad Boyars is a kind of permitted anger. You can scream at a local governor. You can laugh at the mayor. You can post about some corrupt inspector. That anger burns off pressure without touching the person at the top. That's why you get the strange Russian sentence that sounds like a joke, but isn't. The Tsar is good, the Boyars are bad. It's a psychological contract. You give loyalty upward and buy the right to blame downward. The vertical of power. Putin didn't invent the good Tsar myth. He industrialized it. He built what Russians themselves call the vertical of power, a top-down command structure. One center, one final decider, everything else is a chain of obedience. In a democracy, power is supposed to flow upward. You vote and pay taxes. You hire officials to work for you, at least in theory. In Russia, many people still feel the opposite in their bones. Power flows downward. It's not negotiated, it's granted, and it can be taken away. So what do you do in a world like that? You chase predictability, not freedom. The vertical of power does not produce justice and fairness. It produces clarity. It hands you a roadmap showing who stands above you, what they want, and how they can punish you if you fail to deliver. If you are a small business owner, you don't ask, what is fair? You ask, who can shut me down? If you are a school principal, you don't ask, what do kids need? You ask, what does the district want to hear? If you are a doctor, you don't ask, what is medically correct? You ask, what numbers do they demand in the report? And the vertical rewards loyalty and punishes honesty and independence. And here's where the good Tsar myth becomes useful to the system. When the vertical works poorly, the ruler can always shift the blame to the levels below. Arrest a governor, fire a mayor, humiliate a minister on television. The public watches and thinks the Tsar is cleaning house. The Tsar is protecting us. Meanwhile, the vertical stays intact. There's also a practical reason some Russians prefer one strong center, even if it's cruel. Corruption is a tax, and like any tax, people want it to be predictable. If you grew up in the world where the law is flexible and officials are predators, then order starts to mean something very specific. I know who I need to satisfy to be left alone. You don't have the resources to pay everyone. You need to know who matters. The vertical tells you. This is where a dictatorship can feel, perversely, cheaper. In a messy, fragmented system, you can get shaken down by many unrelated hands. Everyone demands something. Everyone blocks you. Everyone has a little right to torment you. The cost becomes infinite because there's no single hierarchy that can tell the smaller predators to back off. This is why many Russians prefer one strong ruler. One center means fewer toll booths. If only he knew. Putin's system runs on a very specific kind of hope. Not hope that the rules will work. Hope that one person at the top can override the rules. That's why you get this weird Russian ritual where a broken pipe in Siberia becomes a problem for the president. Not the mayor, the utility company, or the regional ministry, the president. This isn't a joke. It's the logic of the vertical. If power flows top down, then the only real justice is personal access to the top. Everything else is noise. So Russians write letters. They send videos. They begin with that obedient tone, almost religious. Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, we, the affected residents of the settlement of Sosva in the Sverdlovsk region, are turning to you with the hope that you will pay attention to the injustice taking place in the investigation into the causes of the fire in our native village. And they speak like children reporting to a strict father. The local officials are lying. They are stealing. They are ignoring us. Please punish them. Please protect us. Today, instead of letters, people mostly post short videos to reach the president directly. A village fears a new cemetery near their homes. A town freezes because of heating failures. Families complain about mobilization, about commanders, about men dying. The form stays the same. The message is always, you are good, but you are being deceived. And the Kremlin likes it, because it turns state failure into a performance where the ruler looks like the fixer. That's exactly what the show Direct Line with Vladimir Putin does. For those outside Russia, Direct Line is a nationally televised marathon where citizens call, text, or send video messages directly to the president. It looks like a giant live help desk for the entire country. People complain about unpaid wages, broken heating systems, corrupt officials, collapsing bridges, and closed hospitals. The cameras zoom in on ordinary faces. A woman from Siberia, a factory worker, a pensioner. The president listens. He frowns. He makes a phone call on air. And suddenly, within days, a road is repaired, salaries are paid, a regional official is investigated. The Tsar heard you. The Tsar acted. That's why the show matters so much. It's not primarily about solving problems. It's about maintaining the myth. As long as people believe in the good Tsar, they will tolerate a broken system below him. It also creates something that feels like political participation. Viewers see complaints answered in real time. It produces the illusion of responsiveness. Even though the very fact that someone must appeal to the president to fix a broken pipe reveals how dysfunctional the system really is. And here's the darker side. This ritual trains people to think small, not to demand clear rules, independent courts, or institutional reform, but to ask for personal intervention. Not justice, but mercy. Not systemic change, but a favor. The scapegoats. In a vertical system, blame is a weapon. If something goes wrong, you don't ask which policy caused this. You ask who can be sacrificed. The public wants a villain. The system offers a local one. A bureaucrat is shown in handcuffs. People exhale. Finally, someone is punished. But the structure that produced the problem never changes. The incentives never changes. The next person learns one lesson. Never let bad news travel upward. So everyone below starts managing reality like a stage set. If the leader wants success, you show success. If the leader wants stability, you hide conflict. And when the public is angry for a good reason, the system feeds that anger to a safe target. This is the bad Boyars ritual in modern clothes. It's also why Putin can stay popular even while people hate the state. They don't experience the state as a neutral institution. They experience it as a hostile crowd of petty bosses. That crowd is visible. It can be cursed. Sometimes it can even be punished. Putin, meanwhile, is deliberately kept distant. He appears in carefully managed moments. He speaks in big moral tones. He intervenes. He rarely admits ownership of the small daily failures. When the top stays abstract, it stays clean. And it works because it matches an older emotional habit. Blame the people near you. Expect rescue from a person far away. The fear of chaos. At some point, you might wonder, why do people still cling to the good Tsar myth when it isn't really fixing anything? When their lives are clearly getting worse? Because the alternative feels like a fall. For many Russians, no Tsar doesn't mean freedom. It means predators without a leash. The 1990s in Russia were not just the era of democracy and market reforms. For a lot of families, they are a memory of humiliation. Salaries not paid, savings wiped out, crime, drunk men with guns, private scams dressed up as business. A sense that rules vanished and only the shameless won. Today's Russians have mixed feelings about change, a desire for improvement, but also a deep fear of transformation because change in Russia so often arrives as collapse. Now, add older memory. The time of troubles in the 17th century, the Smuta, sits in Russian culture like a ghost story. It was marked by foreign invasion, false heirs claiming the throne, unrest, starvation, and the state cracking. When the center breaks, everything breaks. So in the Russian mind, the strong ruler becomes less a politician and more a safety device. Not a guarantee of justice, a guarantee that the country won't split into 1,000 local fiefdoms where everyone has to negotiate with a different thug. That's why people can say something that sounds insane. Yes, he's bad, but at least there is order. And the regime feeds this fear constantly. It paints opposition as chaos, protest as civil war, reform as collapse. The message is always, you want to go back to the 1990s? You want another time of troubles? You can see the same pattern in how Russians remember Stalin. Even after mass terror, some people still separated Stalin from the system in the same psychological move. If the ruler is the anchor, you forgive the cruelty because you fear drifting more than you fear being punished. It's learned behavior from a country where institutions were weak, courts were not trusted, and people only had the state as their last resort. Unreliable, but still better than nothing. And once that fear settles in, it shapes everything. Fear of chaos makes dictatorship feel like a roof over your head. Leaking, moldy, sometimes collapsing, but still a roof. And if you are slapped in the rain before, you will defend that roof longer than outsiders expect. Before we move on, I'd like to share with you a short book trailer for my novel about the early days of Stalinism.
Find out who he really is.
Officially, Klim Rogov's biography read like something safe and respectable. a journalist from New York, a foreign correspondent working for a prestigious news agency. In reality, Klim Rogov was a white emigre. And if that truth were ever exposed, he would be arrested on the spot.
Very interesting.
He came to the Soviet Union for one reason only, to find his wife abducted by the Bolsheviks. And he did find her, just not where he expected. It turned out she had caught the attention of the only red millionaire in the entire country, a man inexplicably allowed to run a private business in a state supposedly devoted to building socialism. A man powerful enough to break the rules in Stalin's Moscow.
Will you catch him?
We'll catch them all.
Grooming the Alpha. The Russian vertical of power is not just a political structure. It reflects a much older pattern, a form of group psychology that shaped human behavior for hundreds of thousands of years. In a small group with one dominant leader, low-status members compete for protection. They flatter and bring gifts to signal loyalty. They repeat the leader's words back to him, slightly louder, like they are trying to make them true. In Russia, the whole elite behaves like such small group. Henry Hale has a clean term for this: patronalism. It's when personal ties and favors matter more than rules. Not institutions, but relationships. Not rights, but access. The system becomes a network of patrons and clients, and everyone's job is to stay useful to the patron above. If you live inside that world, you don't need the leader to be wise. You need him to be strong, because a strong patron can protect you from other predators in the same network. So the elite grooms the leader. They stroke him not because they love him, but because they want him to keep playing the role of protector. And the moment he doubts his role, they panic, because the whole pyramid becomes unstable. For viewers who may not remember the context, this happened 3 days before Russia invaded Ukraine. On February 21, 2022, right before the war in Ukraine started, the Kremlin broadcast an extraordinary meeting of Russia's Security Council. Normally, such discussions are private. This one was staged for television. The official purpose was to discuss whether Russia should recognize the so-called Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics in eastern Ukraine. But what the audience actually saw was not a policy debate. It was a ritual of public alignment. One by one, senior officials, ministers, intelligence chiefs, paramilitary leaders stood up and declared their support. They did not argue. They did not analyze risks. They signaled loyalty. When Putin asked if anyone disagreed, no one did. The most revealing moment came when Sergei Naryshkin, the head of foreign intelligence, began to speak. He hesitated. He misspoke. He seemed unsure which formulation would satisfy Putin. Instead of moving on, Putin publicly corrected him, pressed him, forced him to restate his position more clearly, effectively to say the right words. It was uncomfortable to watch. What made it striking was not just the humiliation, it was the dynamic. These were some of the most powerful men in Russia, and yet They behaved less like policymakers and more like subordinates in a hierarchy where deviation is dangerous. For many viewers, it looked less like a modern cabinet discussion and more like a court scene from another century, a ruler at the center and boyars proving their loyalty one by one. And here's the twisted benefit for everyone watching. For Putin, it shows he's above them. He can crush anyone. That keeps them obedient. For the officials, it's a warning, but also a kind of insurance. If they perform loyalty hard enough, they hope they won't be the next example. They are reasonably safe as long as he stays the same person. They already know how to please him. For regular people, it quietly reinforces the good Tsar bad Boyars split. The Boyars look weak, greedy, ridiculous. The leader looks cold and in control. And in a fearful society, in control reads as safe. You can even see how this spills down into everyday life. People don't try to build horizontal alliances. Instead, they look up. They seek a protector and compete to be noticed. They defend the top because it's their only shield against the middle. So that's the paradox. Russians can curse the government and still protect the dictator because in their mental model, the dictator is not a politician. He is a protector at the top of a vertical, and the state below him is a swarm of predatory boyars. The myth survives because it's emotionally cheaper than the truth. It offers hope, a target for anger, and a sense that chaos is being held back by one hard hand. And the system keeps feeding that myth with rituals. The letters to the president, the televised punishments, the loyalty performances, the public humiliations. It's all one message. The Tsar is watching, the boyars are guilty. Stay in line. If you lived in a system like this, what would you do with your anger? Would you aim it upward at the person who designed the machine, even if it's risky? Or would you spend it on the safe targets below just to survive day to day? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and your answers genuinely shape what I cover next. If this video helps you see the pattern more clearly, please like it and subscribe. Share it with one person who still thinks Russia is just about one man's personality. The whole point of this channel is to make Russia legible without slogans. And if you want to keep this kind of independent analysis alive, you can support the work by joining the think tank, leaving a super thanks, or using PayPal. You can also tap hype points to help the video travel. And for those listening on Spotify, hit follow so you don't miss the next episode. It's a small click that makes a big difference. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.